Hello, let me look at our third type of organ system that we need to know in detail, and that is the human respiratory system, aka our breathing system. Our breathing system contains the following parts or organs: our nasal cavity, the pharynx, our larynx, the trachea, the epiglottis, our bronchus, bronchi plural, bronchus is one, and the left and right lungs, our rib cage, and the diaphragm. Here it is again. And don't forget the little grape-like sacs called our alveoli. So air comes into our mouth, down the pharynx, into the trachea, and branches off into bronchi, and then into smaller branches called bronchiole, and then finally into the tiny little grape-like alveoli. The diaphragm sort of helps control breathing in and out. So why do we breathe? Well, there are two processes that kind of work in concert with each other. And one is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. And what happens is once the oxygen is brought into our lungs to the tip of the alveoli, it is diffused into our capillaries, then taken by our capillaries to our left atrium, to our left ventricle, out the aorta, and finally to our cells. Our cells then take the oxygen and dump it off into the mitochondria to make energy through the process of cellular respiration. So glucose plus oxygen produce carbon dioxide and water vapor. So then the carbon dioxide is sent out of our cells, the CO2 is sent out of our cells into the capillaries, into our veins, back to the heart, from the right atrium to the right ventricle, out our pulmonary artery to our lungs, and that's when CO2 is breathed out. So here's how it works. The diaphragm kind of controls what happens here. So the process of inhaling or inhalation involves the diaphragm pulling down, which expands the area in our lungs, creating low pressure because there's more area, a low pressure system. Air rushes in because it's high pressure into our lungs because of that. And when we exhale, the diaphragm will push up. That'll compress or make our lung sacs smaller, creating high pressure in our lungs. That high pressure compared to low pressure out here forces air outward. Let's talk about choking for a minute. So our mouth actually has a common passage for both food and air. And there's a little flap called the epiglottis, which prevents or usually prevents food from getting into our trachea or windpipe. Our esophagus kind of comes behind, and this is our esophagus. Our lungs and our trachea are in front. So sometimes accidentally food is inhaled down our windpipe if our epiglottis isn't working to help close it off. I also want to talk about smoking for a minute. Smoking is really hazardous. This is a smoker's lungs and this is normal lungs. Let's go to alveoli. Do we have any No, I guess I don't have a picture of alveoli. I'll have to show you later. Let's do some review questions based on the three systems we need to know: digestive system, respiratory, etc. But before we do that, sorry, I have a video clip that I want to show you about the respiratory system. Here we go.
The lungs are in the upper part of the body, called the thorax. They are protected by the rib cage. The trachea, or windpipe, is held open by rings of cartilage. The bronchi are tubes leading into the lungs, which also have rings of cartilage to keep them open. The alveoli provide a large surface area for gas exchange. The intercostal muscles are used in breathing. The diaphragm is a sheet of muscle which is important for breathing. The ribs
And so that was just a quick overview of
protect the heart and lungs and are where the intercostal or rib muscles are attached.
Of the different parts. Let's do a review of our systems then. Which part of the diagram would you find your villi? Well, A is the salivary glands, B is the esophagus, F is the liver, C is the stomach, D is the pancreas. Oh, there's two D's. This D is the small intestine, so not this one, but this bottom D would be the answer. Where would we find insulin being made? Insulin's made in the pancreas, so we need to figure out which organ is the pancreas, and it is this D this time, so the top D. Which part would we find acid? That would be letter C, the stomach makes acid. Where would we find heartburn? I didn't talk about heartburn in our video clips, but what can happen sometimes, there's a valve that seals off the esophagus from the J-shaped organ called our stomach. If the valve doesn't work properly, then some of the acid can come up into the esophagus and create a burning sensation called heartburn. The only reason it's called heartburn is because your heart's kind of in that area. Would we find saliva? Wherever the salivary glands are, which would be letter A here. And where would we find our liver? That's right here. Which part of the heart is pointing to the aorta? Well, right atrium, right ventricle. Left atrium, left ventricle. This goes out towards the lungs. This letter G would be our aorta. Which part of the heart is going to the lungs to pick up oxygen? Letter A is going to the lungs. These ones are coming back from the lungs. Which part of the heart is pointing, coming back from the lungs? So probably here, which would be B, I guess, or F2. So F, that's coming back from our right lungs, and this is coming back from our left lungs. Which part of the heart is the right atrium? E is our right atrium. Which part of the diagram is pointing to the trachea or windpipe? And that is number 3, or 8, sorry, 8. Which part of the diagram is pointing the site of carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange? Here's our tiny little grapes at the end of the bronchioles, and these are the alveoli, and that's the site where carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged. The bronchioles, which part is the bronchioles? Number 10 is the bronchioles. Number 9 would be the bronchus. Which of the blood vessels would be considered a vein? Well, hopefully you didn't pick A, because look at the thick, strong, muscular walls of A. A would have to be an artery. Hopefully you didn't pick B, because B is tiny, thin-walled capillary for O2 and CO2 to dissolve. So C is the vein. And that concludes the the respiratory system and review.